My high beams caught it at exactly 3:17 a.m., a gaunt, impossibly tall figure standing directly in the middle of the highway, just as I was about to pass it. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, but when my truck finally skidded to a halt, the road ahead was utterly empty. Story 1, The Hitchhiker Who Wasn't There. This happened to me in the fall of 2019, when I was working nights as a long-haul truck driver. My regular route was a grueling run from a distribution center just outside Denver, Colorado, all the way to Chicago, Illinois, mostly sticking to the familiar stretches of I-70 and I-80. It was a demanding job, full of endless miles and the quiet hum of the road for company, but I loved it. There's a certain peace that comes with being out there, just you and the machine, carving a path through the sleeping country. Most nights were uneventful, a blur of coffee, classic rock on the radio, and the monotonous rhythm of the asphalt disappearing beneath the wheels. But every now and then, especially on those long, lonely stretches through western Nebraska or eastern Colorado, you'd feel it. A certain profound isolation that could get into your bones if you let it. I usually embraced it, found comfort in it, even. This particular night, though, something felt different. It was mid-October, the kind of cold that bites even through heavy clothes, and a thin, wispy fog had started to roll in around midnight. I just passed through North Platte, Nebraska, and was deep into the heart of a stretch known for absolutely nothing but fields and sky. My eyelids felt heavy, despite the 2 cups of coffee I'd had at the last stop. I remember thinking about pulling over for a quick nap, but I was pushing to make good time, and the thought of another few hours of driving felt more appealing than trying to sleep in the cold cab. It was probably around 2:30 a.m. when I saw it. A dark, indistinct shape far ahead on the shoulder, barely visible in the truck's powerful headlights. My first thought was road debris, maybe a blown tire, but as I got closer, a knot tightened in my stomach. It wasn't debris. It was a person. Walking. In the dead of night, in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town or even a gas station. My brow furrowed, this was highly unusual, even for these parts. I'm not usually one to pick up hitchhikers. It's a fundamental rule of the road, especially for truck drivers, too many horror stories. But this was different. This wasn't someone holding a sign at a rest stop. This was someone utterly stranded, walking in pitch black, in freezing conditions. My internal debate lasted only a few seconds. Compassion won out over caution. I mean, who in their right mind would be out here like this? They must be in serious trouble. I started to ease my foot off the accelerator, watching the figure carefully. As the distance closed, details started to emerge, and with them, a growing sense of unease. The figure was tall and incredibly slender, almost unnaturally so. It was dressed in what looked like an old, heavy overcoat, dark and shapeless, with something on its head, a hat, maybe, pulled low. But it wasn't the attire that made my skin crawl. It was the way it moved. It wasn't walking in the typical sense. There was no sway, no natural rhythm. It seemed to glide, almost. And with each step, it seemed to sink slightly into the asphalt, like a heat mirage, only to reappear a split second later, perfectly formed. And its face. I couldn't make it out. It was shrouded in shadow, no matter how close I got, or how brightly my headlights illuminated it. It was like the darkness clung to it, absorbing the light. A sudden, inexplicable wave of cold swept through the cab, despite the heater blasting. It wasn't the external cold, it was a deep, bone-chilling cold from within the truck itself. And with it, a faint, earthy smell, like damp soil freshly disturbed. My hands tightened on the wheel. My instincts screamed at me to slam the gas, to leave this unholy sight behind. But my foot was already on the brake, slowing the massive rig down to a crawl. I pulled the truck slightly onto the shoulder, a few feet ahead of the figure, passenger side facing it. I rolled down my window just a crack, the cold air rushing in. "Hey! You all right?" Need a ride? My voice sounded strangely small in the vast silence of the night. The figure didn't respond. Didn't even flinch. It just stood there, head still down, face still lost in shadow, but I could feel its gaze. A crushing weight of unnatural attention. Then, it began to move towards the truck. Not walking. Not gliding. It was as if the space between us was simply collapsing. A primal fear seized me. This wasn't a person. My brain, slow to process the impossible, finally screamed the truth. I reached for the door lock, my hand fumbling. I needed to get out of there, now. I needed to peel away. But it was too late. Before I could hit the gas, the figure was suddenly at the passenger door. Not on the ground. It was eye level with the window. How could something move so fast, yet seem to glide so slowly? I saw a hand pressed against the glass. Long, impossibly slender fingers. They weren't black, but they seemed to absorb the minimal light, appearing as pure shadow against the pane. No, not a hand. Just an impression of one, like a negative. Then, it didn't open the door. It simply melted through it. Like smoke, or a ripple in dark water. The outlines of its form shimmered, and then it was just, there. A sudden, overwhelming cold enveloped the cab. The smell of damp earth intensified, filling my lungs, thick and cloying, like an open grave had just materialized next to me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum in the silence. I glanced to my right. It was there. Sitting in the passenger seat. Still slumped, still shrouded, but undeniably present. A dark, silent void. My breath caught in my throat. Then, a whisper. Dry. Raspy. Ancient. It wasn't just sound, it was a vibration in my very bones. Michael. My name. How did it know my name? Terror, absolute and paralyzing, seized me. Every muscle locked. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My mind screamed. The whisper came again, closer still, right beside my ear. It felt like cold air on my neck. You brought me in. I let out a raw, guttural scream, a sound I barely recognized as my own. Instinct, pure and desperate, took over. I stomped on the accelerator, yanking the wheel hard to the left. The truck lurched violently. Tires shrieked against the asphalt. I was fighting something I couldn't see, couldn't comprehend. I felt cold hands on my shoulders, pushing, pressing me down. The wheel spun wildly in my hands. The truck was out of control. Jackknifing. Roaring, metal groaning in protest. The world became a blur of spinning lights and the overwhelming smell of damp earth. A sudden, sickening jolt. A violent impact. I was airborne. Blackness swallowed me whole. I woke up to a searing pain in my head and the brutal cold of the Nebraska night. Disoriented, I was lying on the frozen ground beside the interstate, several yards from where my truck had been. My body ached, every muscle screaming in protest. Dizzy, I pushed myself up, my vision swimming. I looked around, desperately searching for my rig. The massive, familiar shape of my truck. But there was nothing. Just tire marks. Long, dark gouges across the asphalt, stretching back for what felt like miles. And then, abruptly, in the middle of nowhere, they just stopped. As if the truck, with whatever was inside it, had simply ceased to exist. Vanished without a trace. I was alone. Lying in the cold, miles from anything. The silence was absolute, heavier than any I'd ever experienced. The police found me eventually, confused and battered, babbling about a hitchhiker who wasn't there. They searched for the truck, of course. For days. Weeks, even. They never found it. No wreckage, no debris, no explanation. They wrote it off as a probable hallucination induced by fatigue and a head injury. But I knew. I knew what happened. I saw it. I felt it. I heard it. I still drive sometimes, but never that route. Never at night if I can help it. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I still hear it. A faint whisper, like dry leaves skittering over cold asphalt. My name. And the smell. The faint, unmistakable smell of damp, cold earth. It sometimes catches me, even now, when I least expect it, a chilling reminder of what I encountered. So, if you're ever out there, alone on a dark road, and you see something that just doesn't belong, don't slow down. Don't look twice. Just keep driving. Because some things, once you invite them in, they never truly leave. Story 2, The Endless Pursuit. This happened to me in the fall of 2019, when I was working nights as a radiology tech at St. Jude's Hospital in Maple Creek. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and the drive home was always the same, a lonely stretch of Highway 17. Most nights, it was just me, the occasional deer, and the comforting hum of my old sedan's engine. There was a peaceful solitude to it, a quiet time to decompress after long hours of dim lights and hushed hospital corridors. I'd usually listen to an audiobook or some ambient music, letting my mind wander. I knew every curve, every dip in that road. It was about a 40-minute drive to my small apartment in Willow Creek, and I rarely saw another soul after about 1 a.m. It was my routine, my safe space, a predictable end to often unpredictable nights. But one Tuesday morning, as the first hint of pre-dawn gray began to smudge the eastern horizon, that predictability shattered. I just passed the old abandoned diner sign, about 15 minutes from town, when I noticed something odd in my rearview mirror. Far, far back, a pair of headlights, but they weren't the sharp, modern LEDs I was used to seeing. These were warmer, softer, with a yellowish tint. It looked like an older car, something you don't often see on the highway anymore. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe a late-night delivery truck or an early riser. I usually tried to keep my distance from other vehicles anyway, just for safety on the desolate road. I continued listening to my podcast, feeling a slight chill despite the car's heater. A few minutes later, as I rounded a long bend, I glanced in the mirror again. The headlights were gone. I frowned, mildly confused. Had they turned off onto one of the barely there farm roads? It seemed unlikely, as I hadn't seen any turn-offs. Then, a moment later, I saw it again. But this time, it wasn't behind me. It was ahead. Its taillights, a deep, faded red, shimmered in the distance. It was undeniably the same car, a vintage sedan, dark in color, with a boxy, old-fashioned silhouette. My stomach did a funny flip. How could it have gotten ahead of me? I hadn't stopped, hadn't slowed. The road was straight for miles after that bend. There were no side roads, no opportunities for it to pass. I sped up slightly, curious, trying to catch a better glimpse. But the sedan maintained its distance, always just out of reach, its taillights glowing like watchful eyes. My heart began a slow, uncertain thrum against my ribs. After a stretch of highway, I spotted the familiar glow of the all-night gas station. I usually skipped it, but tonight, I felt a sudden urge to pull in, just for a moment, to confirm what I was seeing. As I slowed to take the exit ramp, the vintage sedan ahead of me didn't. It just kept going, its taillights disappearing over the next hill. Good, I thought, it's just a weird old car, going its own way. I pulled into the well-lit gas station, relieved. I parked and decided to get a coffee, telling myself I was being silly. But as I opened my door, a faint, metallic scent, like old oil and damp earth, drifted past me. I bought my coffee, took a deep breath, and got back in my car. As I merged back onto Highway 17, my eyes instinctively went to the rearview mirror. And there it was. Again. The same vintage sedan, far behind me, its distinctive headlights burning through the pre-dawn gloom. A cold knot tightened in my gut. This wasn't right. It was physically impossible for it to have gotten behind me. I had just watched it drive ahead, and I had been the only car at the gas station for several minutes. There was no way. My podcast was abruptly turned off. The hum of my engine suddenly sounded too loud, too isolated. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm, a frantic drum against my ribs. I accelerated, pushing my speedometer to 80, then 85. The car behind me kept pace effortlessly. I could feel its presence, a heavy, suffocating weight. It was like a shadow stretching and retracting, always there. I pushed it to 90, my old sedan groaning in protest. The needle climbed, but the distance between us remained stubbornly constant. My breath caught in my throat, a dry, rasping sound. This wasn't a normal car. This wasn't a normal driver. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe I was overtired, seeing things. Maybe it was two identical cars. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The dread was too real, too absolute. Then, as I hit a particularly desolate stretch where the forest pressed in close on both sides of the highway, it happened again. One moment, it was behind me. The next, its dark silhouette shimmered into existence directly in front, its faded taillights glowing mockingly. I slammed on the brakes, my tires squealing in protest, the sudden jolt throwing me forward against my seatbelt. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, a tremor that ran deep into my bones. My eyes burned, fixed on that impossible car. It was slow, almost leisurely, but it continued to pull away. I gripped the wheel, pushing my fear down, replacing it with a desperate, primal rage. I wouldn't let this thing play games with me. Not out here. I floored the accelerator, determined to outrun it, to make it disappear for good. The engine screamed, the world outside becoming a blur of dark trees and flickering road lines. I was going faster than I'd ever dared, a reckless abandon born of pure terror. I felt a cold spot form on the back of my neck, then spread down my spine. It was an unnatural cold, like a freezer door left ajar, smelling faintly of something metallic, something old and forgotten. My body reacted before my mind could fully grasp the threat. I pushed harder, faster, sweat beading on my forehead despite the pervasive chill. I watched the road ahead, willing the car to vanish, to be a trick of the light, a phantom of my sleep-deprived mind. But it was stubbornly, horrifyingly real. Then, a new detail emerged, something that solidified the horror. As I strained to see through the growing light, I noticed a figure in the passenger seat of the vintage sedan. It was indistinct, a shadowy outline, but it was there. And then, as my headlights caught it at just the right angle, I saw an arm, long and unnaturally thin, reaching out from the passenger window. It wasn't waving, it was stretching, slowly, deliberately, towards me. My blood ran cold. The car was driverless. The arm was reaching for me. There was no one at the wheel, just an empty space, a void where a person should be. My breath hitched, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. The shadowy figure continued to stretch, its movements fluid, almost gelatinous. I could feel its gaze on me, a pressure against my skin, a silent, knowing observation. It wasn't just following, it was hunting. I swerved, trying to put distance between us, my tires momentarily losing traction on the damp asphalt. The figure's arm seemed to stretch further, longer, as if it could truly reach me, no matter the distance. Suddenly, it wasn't ahead anymore. It was beside me. The old sedan pulled alongside, its dark paint dull and scratched, reflecting nothing. There was no engine sound, no rumble, just a terrifying, silent glide. I turned my head, slowly, my neck stiff with terror. Through its passenger window, I saw the shadowy figure clearly now. It was a silhouette, a darker patch against the faint pre-dawn light, but it had depth, an undeniable presence. Its head was tilted, as if examining me. I couldn't make out any features, but I felt an immense, ancient cold radiating from it. The arm, still outstretched, pulsed with a subtle, dark energy, a beckoning gesture. Panic seized me. I screamed, a raw, animal sound, and yanked my steering wheel hard to the left, away from it. But instead of swerving, I felt a strange, sickening lurch. Metal groaned. Not a collision, but a merging. My car's frame seemed to distort, to ripple, like water. The world outside dissolved into a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds, a dizzying, nauseating swirl. My vision blurred. My ears rang. I felt a profound sense of disorientation, of my very essence being stretched, pulled apart, then reassembled. Everything was wrong. Everything was changed. Then, silence. My eyes snapped open. I was still driving. Still on Highway 17. The pre-dawn light was the same. But the steering wheel in my hands was no longer familiar. It was larger, made of dark, aged plastic, with a thin, chrome horn ring. The dashboard was different, an antique array of circular gauges. The seats were worn, dark upholstery, smelling faintly of damp earth and something else, something metallic. I looked down at my hands. They were mine. But the car, it wasn't. I glanced to my right. In the passenger seat, the shadowy figure sat, now perfectly still. Its outline was sharp, defined against the window, but still devoid of detail. It was solid, present. And then, I heard it. A faint whisper, like dry leaves rustling, emanating from the passenger seat. It wasn't words I understood, not yet. But I knew, with a horrifying certainty, it was giving me directions. I was behind the wheel of the vintage sedan. I was the driver. And the road, Highway 17, stretched out before me, endless and unchanging. The sun rose, then set, then rose again, countless times, always the same stretch of highway. I am still driving. Still on this road. And the figure beside me, it whispers. Sometimes it points. And I just, drive. Forever. And if you ever find yourself on a lonely highway, and you see an old sedan appear out of nowhere, don't try to outrun it. You might just become the next driver.